You're listening to Widowed AF with
Rosie Gilmoss
and Lucinda Boast.
We've invited some members of the world's most exclusive club to bravely share their stories.
Join us for some honest conversations about living a different life, the crushing lows, the surprising highs, and everything in between.
Please note this is a podcast about death. Carefully read the episode descriptions and be kind to yourself.
But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Let's begin. Welcome back to Widowed AF. Thank you for joining us. Joining myself, I've got Laura Clarke from Buckinghamshire. Hello, Laura, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So your husband, Simon, he died in February 2021, and he died very suddenly, and he died in front of yourself and your children, didn't he?
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you to just, if you're happy to, just tell us a little bit more about, and then after you finish telling your story, I may sort of ask you a few questions. Okay? So when you're ready, Laura, if you just tell us your story.
Yeah, so it was during lockdown, or coming towards the end of lockdown time. It'd been quite a stressful time. Everything had been very busy. We were both trying to work at home. The kids were being homeschooled, so it was all very manic, and we'd had a very late night. I'd been up late working. He'd gone to bed before me. And at that time, my son's sleeping was a bit erratic. He quite often wanted to be in with me. So Simon would sometimes sleep in the spare room just because he was a big guy. But the three of us in the bed just didn't work. So he'd gone to bed in the spare room that night. And I woke up in the morning and I remember lying there and just being like, oh God, I've got to get through today. How much have I got to get done? And I heard this sort of noise, like a weird sort of noise from Simon. And then I heard not a big bang, which I can't quite work out now, but I heard a noise of like he tripped over or something. So I called out, so are you all right? Didn't hear anything. Thought, well, I better go and check on him. Went through and he was on the ground, wedged somehow between the chest of drawers and the bed on his side, making these grunting noises. He was completely not responsive at all, just sort of grunting. I didn't have my phone with me, so I called my daughter, who had a phone at that time. I was like, bring your phone. I need to call the ambulance. And she came in and she thought he'd just fallen as well. She didn't realise, and I know that's something she looks back on now, and she's like, why didn't I know? And I'm like, well, you just don't. It didn't look like he'd had a heart attack. It didn't look like a heart attack. I thought was having a fit. I didn't know what a heart attack looked like, I suppose. But we managed to get through to the ambulance, and they were telling me, you need to get him out. You need to start CPR. But he was over 6 foot. He was 6'2.5". I'm under 5 foot, and he was a big guy. And he was wedged and I couldn't get him. And I was trying my hardest to get him in a position where I could do CPR. It seemed to take forever. I ended up having to move furniture, got him out, started the CPR. I sent my daughter to go and get a neighbour because I knew there was a defibrillator at our village. She couldn't get our neighbour from one side. They didn't answer, so she went the other side. They'd only moved in 2 weeks ago, bless them. She used me doing CPR, so they went off the defibrillator. Though by the time she got back with it, actually the ambulance was just arriving, and we ended up with 3 ambulances, a paramedic car, the air ambulance. Like everyone was there. It was just people everywhere. In the meantime, my son had come in. He was asking what was going on. I'm trying to do CPR and going, oh, you talk to daddy, tell him you're here, and trying to keep them calm while doing all this. And I think at that time, I still thought, well, it's all right. The ambulance are here. It's going to be okay. My neighbour had taken the kids round to their house, and I was then taken downstairs by one of the ambulance people. And I sat downstairs, and it just got longer and longer and longer. And I was going, this isn't good. It's been too long. And he was saying, no, they're working on him. They're doing everything they can. But I just knew, when it's been half an hour, and they worked on him for nearly an hour, but they couldn't save him. So he never even left the house. He died there.
Oh, Laura, I'm so sorry. I want to I know I was going to let you just tell me your story without interrupting, but I wish I could sort of reach into the screen actually and give you a hug, because I can I mean, I can see you as well, but the emotion in your voice is really tangible. I can hear the desperation. It's very painful to listen to, and it's obviously even more painful to relive.
Yeah, it's a hard memory because you feel always, maybe if I'd done more, maybe if I'd managed to get him out more quickly. Everyone told me it's very, very unlikely I could have done anything given the scale of the heart attack that he had. And actually, CPR is very, very rarely successful, even when you've got trained people doing it. So the fact that it was just me, and actually the ambulance were there very quickly, but I think it was just, he just couldn't survive it. So yeah, it was really, really hard. The kids had by this point been taken by my childminder, who's an amazing, amazing woman. She came and got them. She lives in the village. And I was like, right, I need to go and tell them. But I wasn't allowed to leave. I had to stay in the house until Simon's body had been collected.
Oh God, that feels like an unnecessary cruelty. Why was that?
I don't know. They just told me I had to. They were just like, I'm sorry, because I was like, I'll go. They're like, no, I'm sorry, you have to stay here. And
I mean, you have to assume there was reasons, but it does feel like and I guess in that moment you sort of do whatever you're told, don't you?
Yeah, you do. You're like, oh, okay. And my dad and my family are all quite a long way away. They're all a couple, 2 or 3 hours away. But by that point, my dad and one of my sisters, I think, had arrived. My neighbour had been round. My other neighbour had come. She was looking off. She'd phoned the funeral directors. But it took them a few hours to come and get him. I can't tell you how many. It's all a blur. But eventually,
I can hear that in the way you're describing it, that you're not even sure whether it was one of your sisters that came. It's that complete autopilot blur. You were probably offering cups of tea. Just in that moment, you go into this weird, creepy autopilot.
Simon was meant to have done the washing up, but he'd been really tired. And now I can see why he was so tired. And he was like, well, I'll do it when I get up in the morning. So I was there going, the ambulance man and my neighbour started doing the washing up. And I'm like, oh, no, don't do that. And feeling embarrassed that there was washing up out on the side. I'm like, why does that matter this time?
It's a common theme, isn't it? This weird, Jess spoke in an episode about having a pile of washing and sort of feeling embarrassed that she hadn't done the ironing. I mean, your world has just been blown apart, and that's where our heads go to. It's very peculiar.
Yeah, it is. It's such a strange time. I'm very glad. But eventually I was able to go and walk up and tell the kids. And it's just horrendous walking up there knowing you were going to shatter their little lives, really.
It is still hands down the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I walked up the stairs to tell, sort of clock watching until I thought they'd be waking up, because I kind of wanted to get it over and done with, which seems weird. You'd think you'd want to delay it until, leave them in ignorance and bliss really for as long as possible. But that walk up the stairs knowing that life was never going to be the same again. I can, in all that blurred chaos, I can remember that walk so clearly. Sorry, Laura, how old were your children?
They were 6 and 9 at the time.
So old enough to feel the blow, but not really old enough to understand it.
Yeah, I think my daughter, she was 9, she's now 11. She's been able to take it on in a different way to her brother did at the time. It's taken him sort of longer to really get his head around it, I think. And in a way,
boys
made it a little bit easier for him. He's much more open anyway. He talks about it a lot. My daughter...
Oh, does he? See, I just said that boys aren't talkers, and you've just completely disproved me. That serves me right for being sexist, doesn't it?
No, they're very different like that. He's like me, and I do from the beginning. I've talked and talked and talked about it, and all the other stuff that's gone on in my life. And whereas my daughter, she's more like my husband in many ways, and she keeps things a bit more inside. She never talks about her dad. She's had a lot of counselling. She's still having counselling, but even to the counsellor, she won't talk about her dad.
I've got one that doesn't talk very much, and you do worry more about that one, don't you? Because you sound like you very much know, like we do, the value of talking and sharing and shared experiences, which is what this is really, isn't it? It's sharing an experience that unfortunately other people do. Laura, you did touch them on other issues that you've experienced since Simon's death, and unbelievable, you've had breast cancer, haven't you? Which must just have been the most terrifying experience, be staring into the abyss like that. So if you're able to, could you tell us a little bit about, and, kind of where it sent your head at the time?
Yeah, so a couple of months after Simon died, so he died towards the end of February, and this was towards the end of April. I was lying in bed one Saturday morning, and I thought, I haven't checked my breasts for a while, I better do that. And I was like, oh, what's that? It just felt different. And, I highly recommend everyone checks their breasts and is very familiar with what they feel like. And I've always had breasts with quite a lot of lumps in them, but you could tell what they felt like. They have a particular feel, and this was different. It was harder. It felt unusual. And I thought, that's not right. So I immediately got onto my doctor's surgery website and filled in that online form. And I was still thinking, well, probably a cyst, it's fine. And actually they rang me. So this was a Saturday. They rang me by 9 a.m. Monday morning. They got me in. They rang me and said, come in, we can see you at 11, I think. So I was like, okay, that's quick. That's good. But also in those times, there weren't many appointments, COVID times. So you start to feel a bit more nervous. They think this could be something to worry about. And she had a feel, and she was like, yeah, I think we do need to get you seen. We'll put you under the 2-week pathway. But given how everything is, it might be longer than 2 weeks. And
Can I just ask what the 2-week pathway is for
sorry.
anybody not familiar?
So basically, they aim to have anyone with a suspected cancer seen within 2 weeks by a specialist.
So at this point, you're pretty worried, right?
Yeah, because they're not going, oh, that feels like nothing. They're going,
and that's what you want, is it? You want somebody to go, oh no, this is nothing. You've got health anxiety because of the loss of your husband. So that's what you want to hear. Yes. Not we're going to put you on the 2-week pathway.
Exactly. And I was in such a spin. I didn't know what to do. I rang my family, who were great, my sister. I was like, I just can't wait. It was the waiting, not knowing, and just feeling completely out of control. So my sister found a private clinic that could see me on the Wednesday, and my dad paid for me to go to the private clinic, and had mammograms, ultrasound, all these things, biopsies. And the surgeon there, he was quite a sort of traditional old school style surgeon. And he was like, I don't believe in beating around the bush. I'm sure you've got cancer. And I was like, and all I could think about was my kids. I was just like, I can't leave my kids. I can't die. I can't leave my kids. And he was very reassuring. He was like, the reason I love my job is that I make the vast majority of people better. Breast cancer is one of our most understood cancers, etc., etc. But you can always be one of the ones who's not that lucky. And I know, a lot of widows are here in the situation they are because of breast cancer. And I didn't know so much about it at the time.
And it is the word cancer, isn't it? In a time when you are, literally weeks after losing your husband in the most shocking circumstances, and somebody tells you that you've got cancer. Whether or not it's a very eminently curable one, or whether it's a really destructive one, the news of hearing that word is going to impact you the same initially, isn't it? Because you're going to just spin, as you said, spin, and that's all I can hear. And I remember that kind of panic of anything I had, any illness I felt. I had what we think now is just a chronic panic attack, but it presented quite like a stroke, and I was in hospital and lots of tests run. I was completely fine. But even in that moment, I'm kind of presenting myself at the hospital going, you can't let me die. You can't, my kids, and then to receive a diagnosis. So sorry, I've sort of digressed a little bit. So I'll bring you back into your...
It is so hard to comprehend. And when I told people, they were just sort of, well, you can't, because, how could you be that unlucky? It's like, well, I just am. And I've got used to feeling like one of these people who, you do get this sense of, well, if there's the 3%, the bad stuff's going to happen to you, you're going to be one of them. And I try not to have that mentality, but it is hard.
You feel like the world's out to get you, don't you? And actually, I think it was my mum that said, you are not that important or powerful. You cannot control, which gave me a bit of a very motherly reality check. But you can't help it. You feel like everybody is out to get you. And you feel under attack. The cortisone in your body must be out of control at this point.
Yeah, and there was just so much going on, and I felt that the beginning bit was the hardest. Actually, once treatment started, it wasn't so bad. It took about 7 weeks, I think, for treatment to start because I was having so many tests. So I went back into the NHS system. I went back to see the private doctor for the proper diagnosis. So once they've actually had it through, because they can't fully confirm until they got the biopsy results. And he was like, it's grade 3. And at this point, I didn't really understand the difference between grades and stages. And I knew my mum had died from a brain tumour and had been stage 4. So I was thinking, well, it's not 4. But then actually I realised there was only 1 to 3 in terms of grades. So grade 3 is the worst one. So that wasn't good. It was like, it's really strong. You're going to have serious treatment, probably a mastectomy, etc. But they still needed to know more. They still needed some more results through in terms of what type of cancer it was, because it's actually quite complicated. There's various different types depending on what hormones it responded to. And it turned out in the end mine was estrogen positive, but what they call HER2 negative, which is just this different type of hormone profile, which actually is the easiest to treat. So that was some good news, and it felt finally I was getting some
about time.
Yeah. But they couldn't tell quite how extensive it was. I had MRIs, I had biopsies under X-ray, I had just all these barrage of test after test after test and waiting and trying to find out what happened. But eventually I had a mastectomy. They found out it hadn't spread to my lymph nodes, so that was some more good news, which is good to hear. But because they send it off to America for testing. They did a special test to see how likely it is to recur, and it had quite a high score. So because of that, I had to have chemotherapy and also radiotherapy. So that all took place. That was all finished by the December. So sort of from April to December was just this crazy roller coaster. And now I'm on basically 10 years of hormone treatment.
What I'm hearing here is a woman that just did not have time to grieve. Like, you had a matter of weeks which we know is not enough time to begin to process. You are, good Lord, you're still in the denial phase for a lot of that. And then you've been given another life-changing piece of news. Where do you get the chance to process the grief?
It's a really strange thing because it feels like your brain can only do so much at a time. So you'd be panicking about the cancer stuff, and then you'd sort of switch off from that bit and the grief would set in. And then it felt like I couldn't get a break from my head in many ways because there was always so much going on.
And alongside this, so you're trying to process the loss of, and this, horrific issue with your health. And then you've also got, were you able to, I imagine you had to tell them, but to what extent were they aware of what you were going through? I do have a friend who has experienced who has lived a very similar, and I know that for her, it was, the mask went on, and she hid so much of her own suffering in order to keep, as we do as parents, we kind of put this mask of, we're okay on, and then we power through for our children. And did you have to do that? Well, who did you drop the mask with? That's what I want. I sort of want to know I want to hear that you had somebody that you could be with and open up.
I did. So I didn't tell the children until I had a treatment plan in place. So I didn't tell the children till June because I knew how stressful it was not knowing. And I wanted to tell them, yes, I've got this, but, in a couple of weeks' time, they're going to be doing this. So eventually it was like, well, in a couple of weeks' time, I'm having an operation. The doctors are going to sort it, basically. With some sort of element of this is serious, but not wanting them to have that waiting and not knowing. And because that was the hardest bit. So for a long time, I had to keep it from them. I had my family who were great and I had a lot of great friends, but also I had a really good psychologist. When Simon died, I went into a bit of I need to fix this. We need to be okay. Simon always just said he adored his children and he just wanted them to be happy. Whenever we talked about what they might do, that sort of, what do you think she might be like? I think Freya might be an author, but, I don't mind. I just want her to be happy. I just want them to be happy. So I just had this in my head. We have to be happy again. or the kids have to be happy again. I couldn't really deal with me being happy again, but I knew that the kids couldn't be happy if I was a complete mess. I was like, I have to be a stable presence for them. So I got myself into therapy within a few weeks, and I was already in therapy when I was diagnosed with the cancer.
You need that sort of circle of support, don't you? Because your friends and family, obviously, they're reeling from the news as well.
Yeah.
But you need somebody a little bit detached that you can just go and effectively sort of vomit all the feelings that are in you.
Exactly.
And I mean, it's quite spooky almost, the impact it has of just being able to express yourself, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I had EMDR therapy combined with talking therapy, and I found both of them to be very helpful. So it started off working on the EMDR all around the trauma of Si's death. But then as I got the diagnosis, a lot of it was talking through that. And then it moved back into the EMDR. So we moved between the two. But it took me a long time to find a therapist who would see me face to face and actually wanted to see me then. A lot of people were saying, well, wait a few months and see if you have PTSD. I was like, I'd like to avoid having PTSD rather than waiting till it's set in.
Yeah, don't do 4 years. That's how long I waited. Lou had EMDR actually, and she really, really recommends it.
Yeah.
She was able to access it through work. Like the problem is, it is expensive. But I have to say, it's therapy. If you can afford it, is the best investment you'll ever make. It, and you sort of think of all the savings it will be in the future. But I haven't tried. I've had talking therapy, but I'm sort of making some inquiries at the moment actually, because I think, the trauma. And one of the things, we spoke with a lady from a charity called Holding on Letting Go yesterday, and she said a thing that's really stuck with me, and it was, I can't quote it verbatim, but it was something along the lines of how traumatic death and sudden death is so impactful on children because they cannot process that switch, that seismic switch in their lives. And that really, I mean, it made me cry actually when she said it, because although we know it, we saw the impact firsthand, hearing it, really stuck with me. And, for your children, they actually saw their dad die. That's a very difficult image to shake, isn't it?
It is. And I do worry about that for them. Freya did go and have some of this EMDR as well, actually, but she wasn't ready. It didn't really work for her.
And they're very young. Wow. Is she at secondary school now?
Yeah, so she's in year 7 now.
Did she choose to tell the school when she started, or her friends? I ask out of curiosity because I have one in year 8. I have one. I have a child in year 8, and he has made a conscious choice not to tell people. I wondered whether Freya had.
Most of the people, her friends at secondary, were friends with her at primary, so they do know. But she does not talk about it with her friends. I did tell school. She's on the SEN register because of her ADHD that she has. So that, and it's sort of involved with her profile because of the trauma. So they do know, but no, she doesn't talk about it. She would never mention it. It was the anniversary recently. She didn't say anything to school about it. I sent an email just to give them the heads up, just to be aware, because I'm worried that she'll be there and be upset.
Well, where do you stand on this idea that the body keeps score? Because I'm seeing my anniversary is this Sunday, actually, and I'm feeling a bit, off kilter. And one of my children, his behaviour is just slightly off, and I might be making excuses for just a bit of bad behaviour, but I do kind of believe it, because I find sometimes you'll be just wobbling about your day and you'll just feel really sad and you can't place it. And then you'll sort of check the date and it'll be, I don't know, your first date, or it'll have a significant meaning. And I don't know whether it's a bit of, woo-woo or not, or whether it's real, but it's something I'm quite interested in.
No, I definitely believe that, actually. I've been involved in a study recently for people who've had breast cancer doing paced breathing. And it's all about these particular breathing technique that this person at Birkbeck University is investigating. And it's been used in other contexts as well, but it's about resetting it's like going from the fight or flight response into what they call the rest and digest, I think.
And what's that called? Sorry, PACE, PACE?
PACED, paced breathing.
All right, okay, because
I
I
do. Find it very helpful, and the way she talks about it, it is stuff like that. When you're at this tense state of heightened anxiety, you're not able to deal with things the same way. And it can be quite subtle. And actually, the way we breathe can have a big impact on that. And stuff like we should breathe through our nose and not through our mouth. And it's really interesting when you look at the physical reasons, because it can sound a bit woo. If you look at EMDR, seems absolutely ridiculous. I mean, I was sat there with a light flashing backwards and forwards in front of my eyes, holding things that buzzed. And you're like, how on earth can this help? But it's all to do with resetting memories by using this bilateral stimulation. So there's really good science behind these things. And I think it's a
I
shame.
think I'm definitely going to look into this again. I am very interested. I mean, as you may have seen on our Instagram, Lou and I did go into the sea day on my birthday, and I now think that I'm Wim Hof. So I've been obviously watching all his stuff and gearing myself up to do it again. But it was cool. But these things do seem to be working, and I think you can hear the determination in so many of our guests, and I can certainly hear it in you, Laura. I really can. This power, this need to, or this desire to get well, to get through this. Get through, it's not the right term, to crawl yourself out the pit, I suppose, and to create a life for you. And you talk about the importance of giving them a good life. And I actually read a letter to Ben at his memorial, and one of the things I promised to him is that I would give the children a good life, that I would show them that there's still love and joy in the world.
Yeah.
Because this is something horrendous that has happened to them, but it is not the thing that will define them. I hope.
I had very much in my head that I don't want them to look back on their childhood and go, well, Daddy died and then everything was awful. It's always going to be this huge sadness, but it's them that sadness and happiness can coexist. We can still have that sadness, but we can still find a way to enjoy life and make the most of life. And, they deserve that. They deserve that so much. And it's hard. And the other thing I find for me is exercise. So having that therapy, it's very important, talking to friends and family, but exercise has been hugely important to me. I do a lot of hiking. I do running. Couldn't run through my treatment.
So
Ben died.
I'm not a runner at all, but when Ben died, I have to say it was a drunken moment. I signed up to do a marathon. I made it somehow. To say I ran it would probably be an exaggeration, but I did train. And it gave me this, there's no way I'd drag myself out for a run 3 times a week without this kind of end point. And I would like to say I'd kept it up and I was an avid runner. I'm afraid I'm not, but I'm a walker. And it really gave me this, I remember saying, if my body hurts, my head can't. And it sort of gave me, I suppose, a healthier escape from the pain for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's so important. When we were in lockdown, because I'd started running shortly before lockdown started, and when everything was really stressful, Sire used to just send me out. He'd be like, look, just go out for a run, because he knew when I came back, I'd be less snappy. I'd be in a bit of a happier place. And yeah, I couldn't run, but I started doing a lot of hiking around where I live. I live in a village. There's loads of fields. And just getting out has been so important to me. Sticking a podcast on.
If I could recommend one.
Yes, absolutely. I've listened to all yours now, but at the time there were a couple of podcasts I found, and I needed ones where they were just like hundreds of episodes, so I didn't have to think.
Parenting Hell, actually, I listened to a lot of Parenting Hell. I went through there. I discovered them and went through the whole back catalogue in lockdown.
I emailed them to say thank you, because it was like me in a field listening to them. It would just take me away, because I couldn't be with my thoughts all the time. There was so much in my head. I couldn't constantly be in that zone. I had to have something that would just take me away. So I'd listen to them laughing away, and then suddenly something would hit me and I'd be crying away. It would just up and down. But having that thing that I could just stick on, not think about it, it's that lightheartedness.
I grab the dog, put my headphones on, and I go and stomp through the orchards. It is. I think I referred to it in a video as being a bit like my church. It's where I go when my feelings and my emotions all get a bit heavy, and I just need to get out. Oh, yeah. Laura, it's been really inspiring listening to you, and I don't want to use that word lightly, because I guess, like the rest of us, you hear it a lot.
And yes, people tell you're amazing, and I actually spent quite a long time talking to my therapist about it, because at the beginning I was just like, I just don't want to hear that. And she was like, just accept it as the compliment it is. And I've got better, I think. But it's a weird position being where I am, because I've got my widow group of people, like Way, they've been really supportive, and I've got breast cancer support groups. And even within those, people are sort of feeling sorry for you. So it's sort of, you're with them, but you never quite feel like you can join in quite the same way. I don't know if that makes sense.
That kind of double member of the club, isn't it? You're the member of two shitty clubs that nobody wants to be in. Laura, can I ask you what life looks like for you and the kids at the moment?
I spent a long time thinking I needed to move, potentially, because of the memories associated, I guess, with the house. But the kids really didn't want to. And then I was going through treatment. And actually, after time, you just adjust. And I think, we are settled here. None of my family are here, so I thought about moving to be near them. But they're all in different places. They're all scattered. So it's like, well, where exactly would we go? And we have a great support network in the village. Friends, the kids are settled. So yeah, we're pretty settled here.
You do need a support network. I have moved, but I've not moved very far away. And I really, back and forth over it because, like, same as you, my parents didn't live nearby, but they were amazing and they moved into where I lived. And I sort of, should I uproot the children? They've got their support, I've got my support network. But in the end, we only went about half an hour away. And so, it involves me being mum's taxi a little more than I'd, ideally like. So are you able to now to sort of to live your life? Or are you constantly under that kind of cloud of fear and waiting for the hammer to drop? I'm just kind of trying to figure out if you've managed to escape that feeling or if it sort of hangs around like a bad smell still.
It does to a certain extent. I think life has got back to some sort of, I hesitate to use the word normality. I'm back at work. I'm only working 3 days, but I'm back doing that. The kids are at school. Like, life is sort of more normal than it was in terms of day to day. But in some ways that leaves more room for things to hit you a bit more.
I was going to say sometimes that can be almost more painful because you sort of think they're slipping from your grasp a bit.
Yeah. And I've had a couple of quite deep grief waves. I've known that I'll get out of them. I think that's the difference as time goes on. You're like, I felt like this before and I've been okay again. But it is still hard. And also that fear. It's not there every day. I'm not thinking about cancer every day, but something will happen. You'll feel a twinge and it's like, oh, could that be? What if? And it can be hard not to spiral into that fear that, is something I struggle with. And I think it's something I need to go back to therapy for, essentially. I did a year of therapy and then I was in a good place. It was like, well, actually, I'll have a break, see how I get on.
Yeah.
I've been pretty good. Mostly I find happiness in life, despite the sadness.
There's one thing that I did, because I did speak to my friend who is a widow and she has gone through breast cancer as well. And I did speak to her and she said the only sort of, I hesitate to use the word positive, is it sort of made her cherish life a bit more and kind of want to grab onto every opportunity and, just bugger off and take the kids on holiday. And has it given you that?
It has to a certain extent, particularly at the beginning. I was booking, we did so many things in that first year. I was booking things left, right and centre, planning things. And then I think I just got a bit tired. I just need to slow down, actually. And now I find I want to do things, but I don't know exactly what to do. And it can be quite hard. I do find it quite hard planning something by myself and being the only one, the only adult. I do find that still quite difficult.
The buck stops with you, doesn't it? I can relate. Things like looking around schools. Obviously I have remarried and now, John would be very much part of this. But when, before I met John, I moved the children's schools and, walking around and thinking, I don't know what to do. Like, where are you? I need your help here. And it's really, it takes a while to adjust to being the decision maker when you've gone through your entire, sort of most of your adult life, I guess, making joint decisions. So in many ways, sort of it forced me to grow up a bit, I think. I wish, I hadn't had to learn to be as, resilient as I was or am. But it does give you that kind of kick up the arse a bit sometimes, I suppose.
You do. I've had to be much more organised, be more on top of things. All these things that Simon did, all the cooking. And now I've suddenly got to do all the cooking and be in charge of the shopping and just, I have
all the boring things. Oh, and then you have to take the bloody bin out as well. That's the final insult, isn't it? Laura, it is an honour to talk to you, actually. I feel very moved by your story and I sort of sometimes feel that we're quite hard on widows because we've lived in this world for 5 years now, but these stories still don't stop moving me. Yeah, the humanity and the sadness and the strength in these stories, and yours has really moved me today. So thank you very much for sharing it with me and with our listeners. I wish you and your children, I wish you all the love and all the luck in the world.
Thank you very much. I would say that if there's anyone out there in a similar situation, there is now an offshoot of Way for people who have breast cancer. And there is actually quite a few of us, which is depressing in a way.
I will put that into the podcast notes for anybody who wants to reach out or could do with a little bit of support. And as always, our inbox is always open as well. Thank you once again, Laura, and I hope that we stay in touch.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of loss.
But for now, as you were.